Police discovered Mark Thompson's body 3 days after his wife reported him missing. He was lying in the basement of his home, wrapped in a rug. Neighbors swore they heard an argument the night of the murder. But Mrs. Thompson provided an alibi. She had been at the supermarket that evening, and surveillance cameras captured her at the checkout at 9 p.m. However, the coroner put the time of death at 10 p.m. Perfect alibi. Too perfect. Westwood, Ohio had a population of only 15,000. Everyone knew everyone. Gossip spread like wildfire, and crime was so rare that local police mostly dealt with drunken brawls on Friday nights. So when Linda Thompson calmly called the station and reported that her husband, Mark, hadn't returned from work, the officer on duty didn't immediately grasp the gravity of the situation. Detective David Morgan arrived at the Thompsons' home an hour later. He was 52 years old, with 25 years of police experience under his belt, 10 of which had been in the Cleveland Homicide Department. 5 years ago, he had retired and moved to Westwood in search of a quiet life. That quiet life had ended that morning. The Thompsons' house stood in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. A neat lawn, flowers by the porch, a beautiful white picket fence. Morgan knocked, and the door was opened by a woman he'd only seen in photographs in the local newspaper. Linda Thompson, 35, a housewife, community activist, and regular participant in charity events. In person, she was even more beautiful. Neatly styled blonde hair, blue eyes, flawless makeup, a beige sweater, and dark pants. She smiled at the detective, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Come in, detective," she said calmly. "I just made some tea." Morgan entered. The house was as perfect inside as the outside. Clean, tidy, not a speck of dust. 2 cups of hot tea and a plate of cookies sat on the kitchen table. Linda sat down, gesturing for the detective to take the chair opposite. "Tell me what happened," Morgan began, pulling out a notepad. Linda folded her hands in her lap and spoke in the same even voice. "Mark left for work yesterday morning, as usual, 8:30. He's a manager at an insurance company. The office is in the next town, about 20 minutes away. I called him at 6 to ask when he'd have dinner. His phone was disconnected. I waited until 8, then started calling friends. No one had seen him. I went to the police this morning." Morgan took notes, but kept an eye on the woman out of the corner of his eye. She didn't look worried. No tears, no trembling voice, no clenched fists. She spoke as if discussing the weather. "Have you had any arguments? Any conflicts?" he asked. "No," Linda replied, a slight smile playing on her lips for the first time in the entire conversation. "We had the perfect marriage. Mark was a wonderful husband." Morgan nodded, though something about this perfect marriage made him uneasy. Too often, people who talk about perfect relationships are hiding something. "Where were you last night?" he asked bluntly. "At the supermarket," Linda answered without hesitation. "I went grocery shopping around 8. I got back around 9:30. Mark wasn't home yet. I went to bed around 11. Can anyone confirm?" "On the store's CCTV. I always pay by card. They show the time of the transaction." Morgan finished his tea, thanked her, and left. But a doubt had settled in him. Something about this woman was off. Too calm, too collected, too perfect. The next day, he requested the supermarket's CCTV footage. A technician brought the files, and Morgan spent 2 hours reviewing them over and over. Linda appeared on the tape at precisely 8:45, went to the checkout at 8:55, paid, and left. Everything was clear, everything confirmed. And yet, he rewound the footage an hour. On another camera, by the entrance, Linda appeared at precisely 8:30. She entered, picked up a cart, and disappeared into the aisles. Morgan reviewed all the footage from that evening. Nothing suspicious, except for one small detail. In all the recordings, Linda was wearing the same clothes. A beige sweater, dark pants. But a woman who goes grocery shopping usually dresses differently. Or does she wear the same thing every day? Morgan checked the records for the previous days. Linda had appeared at the supermarket 3 times in 1 week. And each time in the same sweater. Too perfect an alibi. Too neat. Too prepared. Morgan put his notes aside and rubbed his eyes. It was already dark outside, but he didn't want to leave. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out an old file he'd requested from the state archives that morning. 3 marriages. 3 missing husbands. The first, Richard Black, had disappeared 10 years ago in Nevada. The case was closed 6 months later, and his body was never found. The second, Stephen Cole, had disappeared 7 years ago in Arizona. Same circumstances. He'd gone to work and never returned. The third, Mark Thompson, was still missing, but Morgan was already confident he'd be found. He flipped through the pages. In each case, the wife had reported him missing, provided an alibi, and the store's security cameras confirmed it. In each case, the husbands had large insurance policies. Linda had collected the payouts, bought new homes, moved to other states, and started her life anew. Clean, tidy, without a single lead. Morgan called the morgue, where Mark's body, discovered that morning in the Thompsons' basement, was being held. The pathologist, the elderly Dr. Wilson, answered the second call. "David, I was just about to call you," he said. "I've pinpointed the time of death, somewhere between 9 and 11 o'clock this evening. But there's a catch." "What?" "He didn't die from a blow. He was strangled, with a noose, thin wire, maybe rope. There's a distinct furrow on his neck. And all the other injuries, bruises, and abrasions appeared after death. Someone staged a fight." Morgan thanked him and hung up. So the argument the neighbors had heard was staged. Someone wanted the murder to look like a family dispute. But why if there was an alibi? He reopened the case. In each case, neighbors had heard arguments a few days before the disappearance. They all described the same thing. Screaming, crashing, the sound of furniture falling, and then silence. The perfect situation. Create the appearance of conflict so that when the husband disappeared, everyone would think he simply left after an argument. But in Mark's case, the body was found too quickly. Something had gone wrong. Morgan decided to visit the neighbors. The first was Mrs. Hudson, an elderly widow who lived across the street. She opened the door in her robe and looked at the detective curiously. "And about the Thompsons?" she muttered. "I knew it would end like this. She was always strange, you know, too quiet, too polite. And he, poor thing, has been walking around like a lost soul for the last few months." "Did you hear an argument the night he disappeared?" Morgan asked. Yes, Mrs. Hudson nodded. "Around 10. Screams, then a crash, like something had fallen. I even considered calling the police, but then decided it wasn't worth interfering. And in the morning, she was so calm, drinking tea on the veranda. Strange, isn't it?" "Very," Morgan agreed. "Did you notice if she had a car around that time?" "She said she went to the supermarket." "Car?" Mrs. Hudson thought for a moment. "You know, I saw her car outside the house around 9. And then, when I got up that night, around 11:30, it was gone. Or was it? I don't remember exactly. Old age, you know." Morgan thanked her and went to the next neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who lived to the left of the Thompsons. He was more reserved, but confirmed that he heard the noise around 10 o'clock that evening. "I was just watching a movie and turned the volume down because it was bothering me," he said. "And then in the morning she came out, said hello, smiled. She's just a normal woman. A beautiful woman, you know?" Morgan returned to the station and reviewed the supermarket security footage again. This time he wasn't looking for Linda, but her car. One of the cameras installed in the parking lot showed her silver sedan entering the lot at 8:30 and leaving at 9:10. Everything matched, and yet, he zoomed in. The car entering the lot was clean and dry, but it had rained that evening. Morgan checked the weather forecast for that day. It started raining at 7 p.m. and continued until midnight. If Linda had gone to the store, her car should have been wet. But in the recording, it was dry. This meant the recording had been made on a different day. Linda had prepared an alibi in advance. A few days before the murder, she filmed herself wearing the same clothes and carrying the same bag. And on the night of the crime, someone else, perhaps an accomplice, or simply a repeatedly played recording, created the illusion of her presence. Morgan realized she wasn't just a killer, she was a genius, or a psychopath, or both. The next morning, Morgan arrived at the station, determined to get a search warrant for the Thompsons' house. He laid out his suspicions to the district attorney, a middle-aged woman named Karen White, known for her meticulousness. She listened, studied the notes and documents, and nodded, convincing David, "Get a warrant." 2 hours later, Morgan and 2 officers stood at Linda Thompson's door. She opened it almost immediately, wearing the same beige sweater, or exactly the same. There wasn't a trace of concern on her face. "Detective," she raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "We have a search warrant, Mrs. Thompson. Let us in." She stepped aside to let them in. The house was as spotlessly clean as the last time. The officers went to their rooms, leaving Morgan in the living room with Linda. She sat down on a chair, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with a slight smile. "Are you looking for something specific?" she asked. "Really?" Morgan replied. "Really?" She laughed softly. "The truth is, my husband is missing, and you're wasting your time searching the home of a grief-stricken woman." Grief-stricken? Morgan didn't hide his irony. "You've never cried, Mrs. Thompson. Not during the interrogation and not now. Your husband is dead, and you sit there smiling." "People grieve differently," she countered. "I prefer to maintain my dignity." One of the officers came down from the basement and approached Morgan. He was holding a dusty box. "Found it behind some old furniture," he said, "hidden in a secret compartment under the floor." Morgan opened the box. Inside were documents, photographs, several men's watches, wedding rings, and diaries. He flipped through the first one. On the flyleaf was written, Richard Black. Middle name, Stephen Cole. Third, Mark Thompson. He looked up at Linda. She was looking at the box with an expression he couldn't read. Disappointment, regret, or satisfaction? "Do you have anything to say?" Morgan asked. Linda sighed and smoothed her hair. "It appears you found my collection, Detective. I always knew you would. Frankly, I'm surprised you realized it so quickly." Morgan gestured for the officers to leave. When they were alone, he sat down opposite her. "Go on." Linda folded her hands in her lap, maintaining impeccable manners, and said in a calm, even voice, "Have you ever wondered, Detective, what it would be like to be the perfect wife? Cooking breakfast, smiling, listening to complaints about being tired, putting up with cheating, putting up with indifference, putting up with being ignored? I was tired of being perfect. I decided that if husbands don't value living wives, let them value dead ones." She talked about the murders as if discussing a pie recipe. Not a shred of remorse, not a tremor in her voice. "Richard was first. He drank, beat me, spent money on other women. I strangled him after 2 years of marriage. I collected the insurance money and moved out. Stephen was better, but he wanted children, and I couldn't have children. He was going to leave. I couldn't let that happen. Mark was the best. He truly loved me, but he started to suspect. He found old photos, asked questions. I couldn't take the risk." "Where were you the night of the murder?" Morgan asked, even though he already knew the answer. "At home, of course, with Mark. I recorded the video at the supermarket a week before. I went to the same store 3 times, so I had a lot of choice. I didn't have to edit anything. I just showed her the camera she needed. The technician, by the way, is my lover. He helped." Morgan listened and felt a chill run down his spine. This woman spoke of her lover as calmly as she spoke of the murders. "You're a psychopath," he said. "Oh, thank you for the compliment," Linda smiled. "But you know, Detective, In a world where husbands beat, cheat, and abandon, psychopaths survive the best. She was taken into custody that same day. During interrogation, she testified with the same icy calm, recounting the details of the murders as if reading from a menu. Her defense attempted an insanity argument, but psychiatrists declared her completely sane. She knew what she was doing, and she liked it. The jury trial lasted 3 weeks. Linda was found guilty of 3 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. At the sentencing, she stood up straight, as if at a social event, and smiled. Morgan was present in the courtroom. As Linda was led away, she turned and looked directly at him. Her lips moved, but no words came. Morgan lip-read her, "See you later, detective." A month later, he quit the police force. Too many nightmares had accumulated over the years. He moved to another state, bought a small house by the lake, and tried to forget. But at night, he dreamed of Linda Thompson. She sat in a chair, sipping tea, and smiling her perfect smile. 6 months later, he received a letter. The reply address was Women's Maximum Security Prison. Inside was a single piece of paper with a few lines written in neat handwriting. "Dear Detective Morgan, I hope you are well. It's boring here, but I found a new hobby. One of the guards turned out to be really nice. He brings me tea and listens to my stories. He reminds me a little of Mark. So trusting. It's a shame you're so far away. I'm sure we could talk again. Best wishes, Linda." Morgan burned the letter in the fireplace. But that night, he didn't sleep a wink. He thought about how much longer Lind would walk this earth, smiling, drinking tea, and biding her time. And that one day, perhaps, she would be released. Or she would find a way to remind everyone of her presence from behind bars. A year passed. Morgan had almost forgotten about her. But last night, as he sat on the veranda, watching the sunset, an unfamiliar car pulled up to the house. A man in a prison guard's uniform got out. He walked up to the porch and handed her an envelope. "I was asked to give you this," he said, and left without waiting for a reply. The envelope contained a photograph. It showed Linda Thompson standing in the prison yard, holding the hand of the same guard who had delivered the letter 6 months earlier. They were both smiling. On the back was written, "See you soon, detective. Don't miss me." Morgan put the photograph in the drawer and locked it. Now he knew. She wasn't just a psychopath. She was a hunter, and she always found a way to remind him of her presence.